Hi, my name is Tiffany Blatnick, and I am here for a public outreach considering the Planovarus metagenesis and the Stichosoma parasites that it is a vector for. So let's start here. What is a vector and what are pathogens? A vector is an organism that doesn't necessarily cause a disease itself, but it might carry something that can. So essentially, it's a host, right? So it harbors something that can be transmitted from one organism to another and can cause both organisms to become sick. Sometimes only one or two may be affected. Sometimes there are hosts that essentially are not affected. The types of pathogens that can be transmitted include things like bacteria, viruses, protozoa, parasites, fungi. A whole lot of fun little entities can be passed from one organism to another, essentially. What is the purpose of this outreach? So I believe that understanding vector biology is absolutely critical for disease prevention and control. And this goes for both people and animals. I think that the public should care about research of zoonotic disease transmission because it's a serious threat to global health. When it comes to the importance of the information that I'm about to share with you, I really do believe that it's vital for the public and the natural world, including, agriculture, wildlife conservation, public health when it comes to humans, right? It's really important to support vector biology research so that we can improve things like surveillance, mitigation methods, diagnoses, treatment, including things like vaccinations, and prevention for many, many diseases. When it comes to solutions, I think that the knowledge of vector biology can absolutely lead to effective management strategies, and that includes infection prevention and potential treatments. I want to give you an example through a species that I did some research on. Planovarus metagenesis is a species of snail, and Stichosoma parasites are essentially a worm. So I'm going to talk about a very beautiful little snail that carries a little worm friend that causes a lot of problems. So Planovarus, this snail species, it has a really beautiful and distinctive shell shape, and the shell has these absolutely gorgeous variable color patterns. It's really quite interesting, and each one is a little different. With that said, it has a really unique development, and so it comes from an egg, and these snails reproduce asexually, and so these little eggs hatch these very, very tiny, fully developed snails. They're just little miniature versions of adults, right? And it's really quite amazing because they don't have separate life cycles. They're born a snail. When it comes to distribution and habitat, they're more commonly found in freshwater habitats. However, they can withstand some salinity levels and have been found within brackish water. And so we're essentially talking about, a space where a river meets an ocean, right? They might kind of linger in that barrier between river and ocean, where the water may mix. You're not going to find this particular snail species in any sort of saltwater or oceanic type of setting. They are currently found in mostly freshwater bodies across Europe, Africa, and Asia, and they might be found in correlation with other snail and limpet species. Bolinus truncticatus actually carries the same pathogen of a flatworm that we're talking about, which some separate studies have been done. Actually, the Bolinus species was first known for transmitting this particular flatworm to others. And so the pathogen that we're talking about here is a trematode, and essentially what that is, like I said, is it's a little flatworm, and it causes this disease called stichiosomasiasis, and we'll talk more about it, but what I want to first address is signs and symptoms that you might see. So in humans, the initial signs and symptoms may take some time to develop. And what you'll notice first and foremost is a fever, some gastrointestinal issues such as diarrhea or vomiting, abdominal cramping, and fatigue. It's fairly serious fatigue. This may last for weeks to months, and sometimes folks don't necessarily know what's wrong with them until they are able to get tested. Later on, and it depends on, if you're infected as a child or as an adult, but folks will start to notice things like malnutrition, anemia. If it's a child, they'll notice developmental delays. And sometimes you'll also see seizures, paralysis, and death. This is, more long-term after the initial onset of signs and symptoms. This is long-term, months to years. For wildlife, most notably, if it's, say cattle, right? Farmers may notice behavioral changes, lesions around the genitals and anus, and they may also notice individuals dying off. Once again, it takes a few weeks before these signs and symptoms start to present, and then once that onset of symptoms are shown, you'll start to see other changes later on, weeks to months after those initial symptoms. You'll start to see weight loss in animals, weakness, organ failure, and this can also lead to death. Normally, we don't see seizures and paralysis in animals. When it comes to treatments, there are 2 current treatments available. Typically, humans are only prescribed one of these treatments, whereas animals, such as livestock, may be prescribed both. So, praziquantel is typically prescribed to humans, and praziquantel, along with anothiamyline, are prescribed to animals. I want to pause here and talk about, why there's a time frame when it comes to signs and symptoms. So several weeks, folks may not notice any symptoms at all. They could be tested and not show any signs of infection. There would be no positive results even if they were currently infected. And this is because of the life cycle of this particular flatworm. So basically what happens is this, the snail has a flatworm living inside of them. This flatworm, once it reaches a juvenile stage, will exit the snail. It can stay within, if it's within water, it can stay alive without a host for 24 to 48 hours, give or take. If it finds a host, it then will enter the host and it develops into an adult and may start laying eggs. This flatworm reproduces asexually, so it does not need a mate. And once it starts laying eggs, this is when we'll start to see onset of signs and symptoms in both people and animals. What's happening here is that it's not necessarily the flatworm itself, but it's the autoimmune response that the body has in reaction to the eggs that are being laid. And so essentially the body notices these eggs and it's like, wait a second, this isn't supposed to be here, and it has an autoimmune response which causes inflammation. And so this is what's causing all those signs and symptoms. Typically these eggs are going to be laid within the digestive tract. We're talking intestines, bladder, anus, as well as liver and kidneys. And that's normally where we're going to find these eggs being found, right? Sometimes in humans, it has been documented that they may travel into the spinal cord or brainstem, and this is where we start to see seizures and paralysis, right? Like I said, it's not normally found in animals, as far as what I could find via research. With that said, these flatworms will continue to reproduce within the body, continue to lay eggs, and it over time will cause things like malnutrition because it's affecting the digestive system, weight loss, right, because it's affecting the digestive system. When it comes to lesions, humans may also experience some lesions, and once again, this is in the genital areas. Further along for humans, if it travels to the reproductive organs, which it can, may cause issues with infertility as well. And these are long term, right? Treatment wise, these treatments are fairly effective. A person infected may be prescribed praziquantel and take this for a couple of days, and that should clear the worms along with the eggs. They may need to be retreated in the future, however, if they are reinfected, which can happen. As far as research and management is concerned, I did come across a couple of case studies, and I want to kind of summarize the three of them because I am at limited time here. And so essentially what these three case studies are looking at are not necessarily just the snail itself or just the flatworm, but they're looking at the environment, right, that the snail is found in, and also what type of impacts are happening within that environment that may be in turn impacting the snail and potentially impacting the transmission of this flatworm to others, right? And so when we're looking at vector diseases, it's really important to consider our human impact and how it may be a driver for infection rates, right? So these studies looked at the salinity and the sediment levels and different mining practices that are going on near bodies of water where the snail is found, as well as the biodiversity within those areas and how that may be impacted, as well as the snail's health, right? That species' general health when it comes to its genetic diversity, individual genetic variation, right? And then when it comes to the transmission rates, who is getting infected and how is this disease being transmitted, right? And so looking at the picture as a whole, right? Not just the disease, not just the flatworm, not just the snail, not just the water where it came from, not just the people that are getting infected, but how is this all working together, right? And this is really important because at this point we can look at, what can we recommend in this particular situation, right? One of the studies did notice that there was a preference for this snail when it came to sediment, salinity levels, as well as pH values within the water, right? And so you could potentially look at, can you manipulate the pH level, right, to, not necessarily hurt the snail, but hurt the infection rates that the snail is experiencing and then maybe lessen that transmission, right? In particular areas, the snail may prefer different sediment levels, right? Is there something that the snail prefers as far as, a food source? Is there a way that we can inoculate that food source with an antibiotic? Or potentially can we, insert another biotic type of prevention measure, right? Such as a fungus that may affect the flatworm, but maybe not necessarily the snail or anybody else within this ecosystem, right? I think that when it comes to this, though, collaboration is extremely important. When I was going through the different studies that were available, I noticed a lot of the same folks working on this study, which is great in a lot of ways, right? And I also think it's wonderful and brilliant to start bringing in other scientists and fresh minds onto this as well. When it comes to, the process of this vector and this disease and the morphology involved and the life cycle traits, it's really important to collaborate with others so that we can develop integrated control measures and combine environmental management along with education and medical treatment too. As far as additional impacts are concerned, I think it's really important to look at the costs involved. When it comes to a human perspective, we are always very concerned when it comes to the economic impacts that are involved with things like this. Unfortunately, that is a driver for our behaviors. So when we look at this, the detriment of healthcare costs, loss of productivity, agricultural losses for those in communities that, literally depend on their cattle, right? And that is their one sole source of income, as well as the impact on wildlife health. It critically affects resources, and on a pretty large scale. And so I think it's very important to consider those additional impacts as we look at all of this as well. Please take a look at my references, and thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. Take care.